What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free for behind the scenes stuff, arm yourselves, typology stuff. I think this will be another relatively quick one. People like typing everyone and everything, and there seems to be a bit of debate about whether or not you can type animals, and you can add objects to that, but we'll cover that later. I think it's pretty clear you can type animals. Animals' personalities follow the same patterns human personalities do. Same functions, same axes, same stacks. And looking at animals from a typological lens helps you understand these animals better and how to work with them. But that got me thinking, and there are a few levels to this. One, functions don't always operate, even within humans, on an anthropomorphic level. Let's take FI. When usually we think about FI, we are thinking about it from the values side, the high morality side, and the introspection side. But those are all higher forms of FI, higher levels. Less often do we think about, even though they're as or even more important, is the way FI understands other people and interacts with them. FI isn't especially good at reading the room unless with TE's influence it's been trained in a mechanical way to read cues, but still that's not exactly reading the room when you say reading the room. What FI is good at is understanding people by getting into their point of view or trying to, simulating it. And this interaction level is a lot more basic, but you can see the way it works within animals. An animal following FI patterns is not going to be reflecting on the morality of courtesy flushing or double dipping, but it will make an animal less susceptible to social tones if that's what that animal needs. Or when it comes to cooperation or conflict, especially within members of its own species, it's going to understand what needs to happen more on a functional level. FITE. On an operational level, this is the way things need to work to keep the machine running smoothly, and I understand that because that is my point of view. I see what needs to happen with you because I am that thing also. And we're not saying animals have super unique personalities, even though they do. I mean, outside their species or their environment's demands characteristics. We'll get to that when we get to objects. But this segues us into the next level here. I feel confident there is a genetic component to cognitive functions. And I think you see that clearest in the most social animals. Let's take dogs versus gorillas. Both those species are clear and palatable examples, palatable to us, of FE with dogs and TE or FI with gorillas. Gorillas and gorilla society, to me, seems to be highly TE. Their social structures are very complicated, and there's not a lot of room for mistakes within these social orders, as you'd see with a higher FE species. Yet, you see great emphasis and forgiveness as long as these social forms are followed, like the gorilla dominance postures, especially in relation to people, human beings. You watch videos, a gorilla will start to test someone because the submission rituals are not being followed, but they usually won't freak out immediately because it's not hitting them on an emotional level. That's why they'll grant leeway and grace. And once the submission ritual has been carried out, the human has lowered itself, life can go on as usual. But if you don't submit the way you're expected to submit, they're going to fuck you up. Maybe because there's an emotional reaction happening there, but more probably because these social orders need to be upheld for their society to function. It's really not personal, this is just the way things need to work. That strikes me as very highly TE with developed FI. And which male gorillas never ascend to alpha status in gorilla society? It's not just strength, it's also gorillas with the inability to fit themselves appropriately into the machine. And that's all so interesting to me because it makes a lot of sense. And gorillas are closely related to us. And going by our, or the cognitive functions, type distribution in humans, you can still see echoes of that. TE is still, by and large, the preferred function. Very high TE in men, and even in women, the feelers tend to be, if they're not SFJs, they're probably FPs with TE. That's why ESTP women are rarer statistically than INTJ women are. TE is the preference if you aren't spec'd for whatever reason for high FE. And then we get over to dogs, which is even more interesting because where apes are close to us, dogs are far from us, at least genetically, but they are far more integrated socially. And what function do you associate most with dogs? FE like crazy. People always go on and on about the way dogs can see a person for what they are, and even just being around dogs, you notice they pick up on and mirror and try to integrate themselves, usually, with your feelings. And not all dogs, because everybody's unique, and I think there is still, well, obviously, but bears stating anyway, type distribution within animals, but by and large, FE is a highly preferred function in domesticated dog breeds. Why is that? It's because FE, high FE especially, lets them integrate with us without language. FE is an overpowered function. We work so well with dogs, and dogs work so well with us because they can understand us without needing language, without even really needing other forms of communication. They can look at us and understand us and work with us on the level we need to be worked with. And then you think about this in an evolution context. Gorillas got to their high TE situation because they evolved for it. And it's the same thing with dogs. Why are dogs, or why is FE so prevalent in most dogs? Natural selection. They were whatever they were when they started as wolves. I'm guessing higher FE wolves, and maybe even higher FE humans, started that. Well, it's not genetic intermingling. We're not fucking dogs. Some people might be, but they're disgusting. Those select few got that friendship ball rolling, and then the more wolves integrated with humanity, the more FE was selected for because it made them work with us better. It made us like them more. And as I understand it, I think some science group is trying to do that, exactly that, right now in an accelerated form with foxes. We're breeding foxes with friendly traits. Well, what is a friendly trait, or how do you define a friendly trait? Is it the ability to understand our intentions and then emotionally defer to us? But then, of course, you get, let's go back to dogs for a second, you get into that type distribution side. It's weird when a dog is not an FE sort of animal. You've encountered dogs who can't read the room. FE is so prevalent in them, it's strange when that happens. But that's not a bad thing, Because how do you train or learn to deal with dogs like these? It's the Caesar Milan. If they don't naturally, in an FE way, understand you and defer to you, you teach them order, social order, on that TE level, and then they're fine. There wasn't something wrong with them, it's just the context in which they have been born and raised, i.e., you're a dog, you're expected to be an FE preferring individual, that wasn't working for them. Cognitively, they weren't born to do it, but once you introduce them to a different context, a more TE centered context, and train the owners to operate more on a TE level, at least with this dog, they're good. You have gotten them into the context they needed to be in. So, my overall point with the animals is functions don't strictly operate on the highest sentience level possible at all times. You need to remember, even within you, all your functions have more primal, basic forms. Oh, and that's another thing. Functions are not totally static. It's not just that there are higher and lower forms, you have side grades too. For example, if, let's say, FE is a tool, if we're using the tool model, which I still think is useful sometimes, there are a bunch of different ways to use a tool. A crow is going to use FE a different way than a dog would because they're different species living in different contexts, but it's still the same function. Even within people, even within the same cultures, you see it very clearly within different cultures, but two people, same culture, they're going to understand and use their functions in different ways. The functions are not static. Each function and function pair, rather, is more like a fundamental aspect of reality, or forces of nature operating as pairs, well, dichotomies. There are tons of different forms they can take or levels they can reach, but they are still speaking to these basic forces of nature. And that leads us into typing objects. I'm of the mind you can type objects, but that opens up two strange doors we'll need to open. Strange door 1 or theory 1. Cognitive functions are not cognitive functions. They are universal motions. Why is it possible for you, if you want to try it, to type a storm, let's say, or a weather pattern, and it works? Why does that work? Well, it might be the case these cognitive functions are not describing the way minds work and are more like laws of physics we have evolved within and to perceive. In other words, there are even more basic forms of all these functions and axes and dichotomies. And we are just at what we perceive to be the highest level of them. So with animals, you see lower forms of the functions. In nature, you can feel very basic forms of the functions, but that's odd because this is supposed to be a brain phenomenon, but maybe it isn't. Existence is some kind of song or wave, and we're just the highest notes of it. But it does, in fact, go all the way back down. A grand pattern in the ways things happen. When you have a this, there is going to be a that somewhere, and on the flip side, there is not going to be an X that or a Y this. Binaries built over binaries built over binaries. Cognitive functions don't result from life. Life results from cognitive functions, or whatever better word we would use for these basic primal patterns. Our minds, or minds in general, objects in general, are built in the image of nature, of these unseen forces and patterns, like gravity. Or you can look at it through option 2, door 2, which is sort of the same thing but from a different angle. Cognitive functions are just cognitive functions. They do result or have resulted from evolution, from life. They come strictly out of the mind. But why do they see cognitive function type patterns within nature? Because we evolved from nature, and there is a pattern to the way nature needs to be perceived. Or there are maybe there are tons of different ways to perceive nature, to perceive what is, but on Earth, and humans especially, that tool, that receiver, or that scanner has taken the form of cognitive functions. It's the same as asking how how would you understand something outside language? Language is a tool to help you cognate, to think, to form, to create order. It's like a big vase to contain your thoughts. It's helpful. At the same time, it's a prison because you're stuck in it. Maybe cognitive functions are something very similar, but on a genetic level, on a biological level. Cognitive functions are biological language. Why do you see cognitive functions and these patterns everywhere? Because they are part of the way you have been built to perceive what is. So, in this way of looking at it, it's not that these binaries exist themselves within nature everywhere at all times, forming everything, building everything, but rather cognitive functions are like organs. They're like your eyes. These these are the patterns with which you perceive what's there. So maybe they aren't there themselves, but they will appear to be there to you, and frankly, they will be there to you because they are part of what you are. Let's go back to eyes for a moment. Is the world designed to be seen with your eyes, or are your eyes a tool you have developed to perceive what's there? If we're looking at all this from this point of view, I'd say it's the latter. Nature came first, and your eyes developed to see it. Sight is not a basic law of the universe, or the universe does not exist to be seen. You perceive what is this way. You can't escape your perception because it's all you have. So to you, it's totalizing. It'll always be totalizing, but it's not the ultimate. In this point of view, cognitive functions would be the same thing. They're your eyes, but for understanding and pattern recognition. You see them everywhere, you see cognitive functions everywhere because you're built to see them everywhere. Even if you don't have words for them yet. It would be weirder if you didn't see cognitive functions everywhere, the same way it would be weird if there were things you could not see, as in things in nature that cannot be seen, that defy your ability to perceive them. I'm sure there are things like that, but my point from this point of view is it's not weird or wrong to see cognitive functions in everything, the same way it's not weird to see things. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you've evolved to do. And there is probably so much more out there that exists outside our ability to perceive it, because we are not masters of the universe, we are products of it, and our inability to perceive or understand something does not stop it from existing. cognitive functions are your golden cage as much as your eyes are and your language is. Now, between these two options, it's freaky because these ideas should be kind of the same thing but from different angles, but they're very different. And I believe in both of them, which fucks me sideways. For now, we're going to go with both. There's something important here, and I haven't worked it out yet. But for this video's purposes, yes, you can type objects, and I think that clues us into other shit that's going on. Maybe we even need to be thinking more about the lowest forms of the functions. That might give us some tools or keys or clues. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.